Okay, we're going to go over adding integers using just numbers because sometimes it's just not reasonable to use a number line, especially when the numbers get really big. So we're going to go over some steps on how to do this without using number lines and without having to draw a picture. Okay, the first situation that we're going to talk about is adding integers when the numbers have the same sign. So there's a few steps that we can take when we're adding integers that have the same sign. There are two steps we want to take when we are adding integers with the same sign. The first step, we are going to add the absolute values. And if you don't remember what an absolute value is, feel free to go back and watch the absolute value video. It is basically the distance away from zero. Okay, so step one, add the absolute values. Step two, we need to use the common sign. And this one is a little bit difficult to explain unless we're working on an actual problem, but the sign is either going to be positive or negative, depending on whether we're using positive or negative numbers. So this will hopefully make more sense once we work on an example. Okay, so here's an example problem that you probably already know how to do, which is fine because I know that 2 plus 5 is 7. So we're going to test out our two steps just to make sure they work with a problem that we're already familiar with. So I'm going to copy in those two steps that we just went over. And we're going to see whether or not this works with a problem that we already know the answer to. So the first step is to add the absolute values. We need to find the absolute values first. So the absolute value of 2 is 2. And the absolute value of 5 is 5. So if we add these two absolute values together, we get 7. And then it's kind of hard to see, but when we are looking at positive numbers, there is actually an invisible positive sign in front of these numbers, and we don't usually write them because it would be a huge pain to have to write a plus sign in front of every single number every time we wanted to write a positive number. So just remember, there is an invisible positive sign in front of these positive numbers. And that is what we mean by the common sign. In this case, the common sign is positive. So we take our answer that we got, which is 7, and we know that the common sign, both numbers have a positive sign that is in common with each other. Our answer is 7. And again, that is just an invisible positive sign, so we can erase it. If you wanted to add that in, that would also be okay. Okay, so now we've done our test. We can see that the answer we ended up getting when we followed our steps is the same as the answer we thought we were going to get. So that tells me that these steps work. Let's try it with maybe a more unfamiliar problem. Okay, so here we have a very similar problem, but this time I see that we have negative numbers. They're both negative, so I know that I can follow those steps that we came up with for adding numbers or adding integers with the same sign. And I'm just going to highlight it. These have the same sign because they are both negatives. Okay, so we're going to keep that in mind for step 2. But the first thing we need to do is step 1. Which is to add the absolute value. So I'm going to take the absolute value of both of these numbers. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. And the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. And then I need to add those two together. And that gives me 7. But I am not done yet because I need to do step 2. Step 2 tells me to use the common sign. And I already figured out that the common sign is a negative sign. So my answer is going to be a negative 7 this time, because we had to add that negative sign in. Okay, here's another example. I see that I am adding, and I also see that these two numbers have the same sign, so I can use my 2 steps. Okay, so let's find these absolute values so we can add them. The absolute value of negative 8 is 8. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. And now I need to add those two together. So 8 plus 5 is 13. Now I'm not done yet because I need to find the common sign and put that on my answer. Let me look at my original problem. This is a negative number, and this is also a negative number. So my common sign is negative. So instead of 13 being my answer is actually negative 13 because I used the common sign on my answer. Okay, we're just going to do one more example. This is an example to show us why it's very important for us to be able to do this without having to draw a number line. I don't know about you, but I do not want to draw a number line that has enough space for a number as big as negative 512. So, we're going to follow our 2 steps. And you're going to see that this is going to be much quicker for you than having to draw a giant number line. So first step, we're adding our absolute values. So the absolute value of 512 is 512. The absolute value of negative 32 is 32. So I take those absolute values and I'm going to add them together. And that's going to give me 544. Okay. My second step says I need to use the common sign. So on the original problem, that was a negative 512 and a negative 32. So my common sign is negative. So instead of 544 being my answer is actually negative 544. So you might notice that I have been doing mostly problems with negative numbers, and the reason for that is because most of you already know how to add positive numbers together. So I focused on the negatives for these, but just be careful. If you are adding positive numbers together, like in this example, your answer is going to be positive. If you are adding negative numbers together, like in these examples, your answer is going to be negative.